Hi, everyone. Welcome to Nothing But Now on Transformation Talk Radio. I'm Mariangela Maguire, and I'm so grateful to you for joining me today. I'm grateful to you for joining me for the last year. In fact, many of you have been with me since the beginning, and those of you who have, thank you. Those of you who have come in and out or just found the show, I'm glad that you're here with me today on what is the first anniversary of my show. The purpose of the show, of course, is to bring attention and awareness to the present moment, mindfulness. And I hope that the show itself is an opportunity for you to practice mindfulness, to relax into this moment, to allow yourself to find places in your experience that resonate with the topics I talk about on the show. And all in the service of becoming students of our own mind, our heart, our body, really listening to ourselves on all levels. My topics are intended to support people in their mindfulness journey, and the purpose of mindfulness is not only to bring attention and awareness to the present moment without judgment, but to do so that we can experience greater internal peace. And the value of that we might think is obvious. If I feel more peaceful, that's always a good thing throughout my day. But it also means that we're a source of greater peace, that our energy is different. It is more peaceful in our interactions with others and with the world at large. And that is extremely important, I think. It's always been important, maybe today more than ever. So as I said, I've been doing the show for exactly a year, and what a strange year to choose to start a podcast. When I started, my purpose, and I started, of course, talking about the show and talking with the people at Transformation Talk Radio weeks and weeks before the COVID pandemic set in, months before George Floyd was killed, months before the election in the November 2020. So I can't believe all three of those things happened in 1 year, and we're still managing, dealing with, accepting, recognizing, coming to terms with all of those things and so many others, both in our individual lives, in our individual hearts, and in the world at large. So because my original purpose within the show was to support people in their mindfulness journey and to talk about it from the perspective not of my expertise as a Buddhist philosopher, because I'm not one, but just simply from my experience both as a life coach and as a person who is working to incorporate mindfulness into her daily life and into every moment when possible, as much as possible. But of course, the events of 2020 pushed me into a place where I really had to ask myself what purpose this show was going to serve. And I hope that I've been able to address the relationship between mindfulness and what's happening in our culture at large, in the world at large, over and over again, because I have been surprised. I certainly had those moments early on where I thought, this is just nonsense, perhaps, right? This is in no way going to be helpful to anyone who's coping with some of these incredibly difficult issues that we're coping with, both politically and personally. But the more I talked about it, the more I read, the more I talked with others, the more deeply I became convinced that if we want to change the world, we have to start by changing ourselves. And the most effective strategy I've ever found in my life, the readings that have been most nourishing to me, and the practices that have made genuine differences in my life have really all come back down to mindfulness. So it's the 1 year anniversary, and I'm going to talk today about why I'm going on hiatus. So actually, this is going to be my last show for the next several weeks. A few weeks ago, in the spirit of knowing myself, listening to myself, I noticed that I kept thinking, I want to stop doing the show. I'm ready to stop. I wrote down this was probably in February, and on a piece of paper that's always on my desk, I wrote down the dates of the next 6 or 8 shows and kind of marked them off one by one. And as I got closer to the last date, which was actually last week, that I'd written down, I realized I'm ready to stop doing this. And at the same time, that didn't feel 100% true. So I finally got to more practical things and said, okay, if I'm going to stop doing this, I need to tell the people at Transformation Talk Radio. And I need to tell Jacob, my producer, and I need to tell Jessica, who's the executive producer. And that was really helpful, because once I found and identified the actual concrete action I needed to take, a word floated into my mind, and that was hiatus. And suddenly my heart opened a little bit, and I thought, no, that's what it is. It's not that I want to stop doing the show forever, but I definitely want to take a hiatus. So that's when I started talking to Jessica about that and letting Jacob know, and they've been incredibly supportive, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But I knew I didn't want to stop, because even though I want this hiatus, I also know how much I enjoy doing the show. The process of preparing for it has really been a great exercise for me in understanding my own mind, my habits of mind. It's been a mindfulness exercise, right? The actual part of being here, doing this on Facebook Live and working with Jacob, and knowing that some people I know and care and love about are listening, and just kind of the on the flyness of certain parts of it. I love that. Making it work when, I don't know, the sound goes out or something like that, or I've somehow muted the Jacob for no particular reason except that I'm not great with technology. And then the feeling afterwards. At the end of the show, I always feel relieved, right? I mean, it's intense. There's relief in that, but there's also great exhilaration. And so I knew I didn't want to give all of that up. And in taking this moment to talk about this pause that I'm going to take, it's really important to me to acknowledge 3 people without whom I would never have done the show at all, or kept doing it. And the first is my partner, Laura, who has been nothing but supportive throughout. We are very similar in some ways and very different in others. And finally, a few weeks ago, we were talking about it, and she said, my God, I would never do something like that. And I thought, once you start doing something and it gets a little bit familiar, you forget that it's not everybody's cup of tea, and that there are people who say, good for you, you're doing something I would never do. But she, despite that fact that she would never do this, she has been incredibly supportive and kind about it and encouraging. And there was a moment before the show started in the preparation phase last January or February where I thought, nope, I've made a mistake with this commitment. I'm not going to do it. And I told her, and she really challenged me. And she's pretty cautious about challenging me in certain ways, especially when I'm really have dug my heels in about something and it's emotionally laden. But she did, and I was very mad at her. And she was right, and I'm grateful to her for taking the risk in that moment in our relationship to push me. I want to thank my friend Carolyn, because when I said to Carolyn, should I do this? She said in her best Carolyn response, why wouldn't you do it? And that felt great, and it meant a lot to me. And then to my friend Craig, who's with me week in and week out, always, always, always encouraging me forward. So I decided to make this change, and I'm excited for it. I want to recharge. I've reached a point with the show where I often, as I often do this happened when I was a faculty member, this happened when I was an administrator, I get to a place with a job and a task that it's so important to me that I can't read anything, I can't listen to anything, I can't, honestly, sometimes it feels like think a thought without questions like, should I talk about this in class or on the show or in my work? How would I use this? How would I explain this? And I just want to take a break from that for a while, because I want fresh ideas. I want fresh thoughts, unburdened by how will I transform this into some particular thing. I just want to soak some things in for a while. So today I want to leave you with some key ideas about the mindfulness journey that I hope will continue to support you during this break. And the first one, of course, is always about breathing. So we're going to do our breathing exercise for the day, because why? Well, we breathe in this kind of conscious, intentional, focused, do a little counting while you're doing it way, because taking a hold of our breath in this way, really bringing our full attention to it, noticing everything we can notice about it, really brings peace, right? It calms us down. It brings us into a safer kind of feeling or space within ourselves. It focuses our attention. It's the pause that we need throughout our day in order to be responsive rather than reactive. And there are so many breathing exercises to do. If you haven't found one that really works for you in your life, I urge you just keep Googling it, because they're especially mindfulness practice breathing exercises. They can be short. They are the kind of thing I do before I go into a stressful situation. So I always do it before I start the show. I do it in the middle of the night if I wake up and I'm struggling to go back to sleep. This is a key thing to take away from this. If you only do one thing that I ever suggest, find a breathing practice that really is helpful to you. So the one we're going to do today, we're going to bring our hands to our heart center on an inhale. We're going to interlace our fingers and push our palms out on an exhale. We're going to raise our hands above our head on an inhale, and then we're going to let go on an exhale. And we're going to do it 3 times. So inhale. Third time. Thank you for joining me with that. I also like Laurie Cameron's 3 deep breaths. That's a very quick one. And one that I don't do on the show because I think it would be awkward to do, but I find really helpful, is cleverly called 478. And if you Google someone like Dr. Wheel, whose first name I've forgotten, but he's a wellness kind of guru and physician. And he does a great quick video of 478. 4 breaths in, hold for 7 counts, release for 8, do it 4 times. That is a powerful one. And I strongly encourage you to look into that or something else that can really bring that moment of calm, clarity, focus, pause into your daily life throughout your day in a way that doesn't take a lot of time, doesn't take a lot of effort, but it does take giving yourself permission to say, this would be helpful to me right now, and I'm worth that. So I think the best way to learn about something is to teach it to others. And so in some ways, that's been what I've been doing on the show. So when we come back from our first break, I'm going to talk a little bit about what I've really learned in the last year from doing the show, and what I've learned about myself, but more important, what I've learned about mindfulness that I think can be helpful to you. So what are some key things you might take from the program today as you go into this space where I'm not going to be there every week? It's going to be fine. Okay, so we're going to take a break right now. I'm Mariangela Maguire, and you're listening to Nothing But Now on Transformation Talk Radio. We'll be right back. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Nothing But Now on Transformation Talk Radio. I'm Mariangela Maguire. Grateful to you for joining me today. Today, I am talking about what I've learned in the last year of doing the show, because it is both the 1-year anniversary of the show as well as the last show before I go on hiatus for several weeks. And as I mentioned before the break, I've been a teacher most of my life. That was my primary career for many, many years. And what people often say about teaching is that the best way to learn something is to teach it to others. And I think that that's true, whether the thing is something like me, like earned a Ph.D. in it, and so you think you know it pretty well. But it's really when you get into the classroom and you're trying to explain complex ideas to other people that you really come to a much deeper understanding of something, even something maybe you've been studying for a long time. So in this particular case, this is something that has really been important to me, mindfulness, but I pursued it primarily for my own purposes. Then I incorporated it into my coaching practice, and then wanted to talk about it in this context of the podcast as simply another practitioner, another person on a mindfulness journey. And the phrase that I really tried to use as a theme around the show is becoming students of our own mind. And I think that phrase comes naturally for me because I think of myself always as both a student and a teacher. I think we are all have the capacity to be and are continuously in our lives, both the student and the teacher. So what have I learned? And some of this is kind of what I've learned that has, well, in different ways. So the first phrase that really comes to mind of what I've learned is editing matters. And I learned that first about the show content. And I, several months into or maybe just several weeks into the show, I was talking with my friend Carolyn, who had urged me to do the show. And she said, there's just too much in the show. You're trying to cover too much territory. And I think that one of the things I've really learned this year is to pull back and to try to cover less territory. And yet, because we are all always learners, I guess, last week was a great example where I just had way too much and still got to the end and thought, right, the 5 to 7 minutes I'd really kind of planned as the ending of the show, gone because I was still in the third segment. I had too much information. So editing matters. And even knowing that editing matters is not always enough to get you to edit, but it's worth thinking about. And I think about it in other aspects of my life, of course. I notice it and think there's a parallel in yoga classes. Have you ever been in a yoga class and noticed that if you're not a strong or an experienced practitioner, there's a tendency to do a stretch to the fullest. And you see us, the novices, kind of gritting our teeth and stretching, right? And there's so much tension in our bodies as we try to stretch and stretch and stretch and get into that perfect position. Never happens for me, but that's okay. And yoga teachers often say, go to the furthest point and then come back 10%, 20%, 30%. And I found that really a strange thing to say. It took me a long time to kind of understand what that would mean to do that, right? That there is a tendency, I think, that most of us have when we are attempting something, we're working at something, we want to take it to its fullest extent. We push ourselves way, way out there. And that's great. But there is such value in then relaxing back 10%, 20%. So I think about the show, what I learned to do, not always perfectly. Last week wasn't a great example, but the week before was pretty good. Here's all of it, and I'm going to take it back 10%. 20%, 30%. I stretch to my farthest point and then I relax a little. And it helps me stretch further the next time. So I think life in general, we can take things back 20%, 30% without having to see that as any kind of failure. If it's our work, or if it's something like an embodied endeavor like yoga, we tend to, that little competitive edge kind of comes in, and that maybe it's that dictator voice saying, you have to be good at this, right? You have to do this perfectly. You have to do this to the fullest extent. And that's what pushes us into places where we get hurt, or we make mistakes, or we don't do things as well actually as we would like to. So for me, editing matters in every aspect of my life. Can I bring it back a little? And in some ways, of course, that's what this hiatus is bringing things back a little. Okay, I know places in my life in the next few weeks that are going to be really full of other things, other projects, other responsibilities. And so I wanted to let go of something, and this was the right thing to let go of at this time and for this time. I think a second thing that I've learned over and over again this year is that what we fill our minds with really matters. Whether our concern is how we use our energy, how we talk to our friends and neighbors and children and family members in general, with how we see the world, that what we consume and through our minds, through our eyes, through our ears, really makes a difference. That there is no, that experience we often have, and I feel like I spent my whole childhood sort of killing time watching crap on TV, right? That was my after school activity. And I liked it. But I've fed my mind a lot of junk over the years, and I've just become convinced. And of course, I think part of this is aging. You start to get older and you start to see the clock ticking down and you think, really, what am I going to spend my energy on? But I wish I'd kind of gotten this idea or believed it more earlier, I suppose, because I think I have spent a lot of time looking at things that give me a distorted worldview, that don't tell me the whole story and the whole picture. I've had a very restricted worldview too often. And so it's not that there's one thing or another I should or should not learn, know, do, etc. But I should be aware. I should notice that if I watch a whole lot of crime drama and I read a whole lot of mystery novels that are filled with crimes and police procedurals and detective stories, etc., yeah, the chances are my worldview is going to get to a sense of always being endangered, right? That I live in an extremely violent society, that there are criminals around every corner, that I always have to be on guard, that I can't trust anybody, like no surprise, right? Whatever I fill my mind with is probably going to shape then how I see the world. And I think we've all learned that in this last year, that there are many different perspectives on any given event. And we want to, if we want to be in a place where we can say, I understand what's happening, and I can talk about it in a way that is sensitive to all perspectives, then I have to fill my mind with new, probably, perspectives, new information, and maybe less of some stuff that actually hasn't been particularly helpful to me, or that has given me a distorted worldview, that has pushed me into reinforcing maybe stereotypes or perspectives that are unreasonable, frankly, because, that's just how stereotypes are. They're unreasonable. So editing matters. What I fill my mind with matters. And the third thing I want to mention in this segment anyway is that I can do hard things. Glennon Doyle's latest book, cannot remember the title right offhand, but it's her latest memoir and it's just lovely. And she talks about the day she's with her daughter at the grade school and they walk past one of the classrooms and one of the teachers has made a big banner in her classroom and it says, "We do hard things." And she loved it and I loved it because I don't think I grew up believing that things should be hard, right? If things are hard, that means something's wrong, right? I'm doing something wrong. The world around me is wrong. What's being asked of me is wrong. That if things are hard, if I have to struggle to do something, then something is off kilter and maybe I shouldn't be doing it, et cetera, et cetera. So doing the podcast, and for me, doing it once was not necessarily hard. Doing it 4 times was not necessarily hard. Doing it every week for a year, that was the kind of challenge that was very hard for me to keep up with it, to keep going. And so for me, this was a hard thing. And one of the things that was very noticeable to me was that story of coming back, that I kept coming back to, and especially during a preparation period, was I'm doing this thing. I think it's hard. And therefore, what does it mean to do something hard and to do it well? It means to be miserable. It means to be anxious and nervous. It means to be self-doubting. It means to be asking myself all of these questions about why I'm not better at what I'm doing, right? That I had really conflated that idea of doing hard things. I wasn't convinced I was capable of it. And when I was in the midst of doing it, I felt like in order to believe that I was going to be doing it well, I had to be suffering. So that's one of the things that was the most important part of the practice for me of doing the show this year, was recognizing that I could talk to myself about how I was talking to myself when I was preparing for the show. I could recognize that habit of mind of about 24 hours before the show thinking, oh my God, why did I agree to do this? This is crazy. I don't know what I'm doing, right? And that thought would come and I got to the point where I was able to say, oh, I see you. Oh, there's that thought. Like it was an old friend, not a particularly well-loved friend, but an old friend nevertheless, familiar, known, etc. Right? The morning of the show, I almost always think to myself, oh my God, I have nothing to say. I don't have enough content. I have like 10 minutes. What am I going to going to do for 10 minutes, but it's 47 minutes long. Oh my gosh. Again, that's the point. Oh, I recognize you. You're that thought that says I never have enough content when the reality is I always have too much. Hi, how you doing? Move along, right? So I learned that I can do hard things, and I also learned that I don't have to be miserable while I do hard things. Huh, who knew? It's a miracle. So we're going to have a couple more things that I want to kind of leave with you as you go on your way for these next few weeks, in addition to recognizing that maybe pulling back 10, 20, 30% might be a good way to go about your day, that what we fill our minds with really shapes how we see the world. And it's good to be cognizant of that and maybe, again, edit a little. And that when we do hard things, and we all do hard things, we all do hard things. Hard, maybe not for the other person, but hard for me, hard for you. We don't have to be miserable. Being miserable when you do something hard is not the evidence that you're doing it well. So we're going to keep talking about mindfulness when we come back from the break. I'm Mariangela Maguire, and you're listening to Nothing But Now on Transformation Talk Radio. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Nothing But Now on Transformation Talk Radio. Thank you so much for joining me today on the 1-year anniversary of my starting of the show, and my last show before I take a hiatus. And I've been talking today about some key concepts that I've really thought about in the last year, that I've come to understand more deeply and experience more vividly as a result of doing the show. So I've been talking about editing, and that it is okay in our lives to do a little bit less, to not always push things to that extreme in terms of effort, because that's where we get hurt. That's where our lives get out of control. And that when we can push, but then come back maybe 10, 20, 30%, we can be in a more comfortable place and be more effective at whatever it is we want to do. We've mentioned really paying attention to the idea that what we fill our minds with matters and shapes how we interact with the rest of the world and the habits of mind we develop. And finally, that we all do hard things, and that we don't have to make ourselves miserable in the doing of the hard things in order to convince ourselves that we have self-worth, that the misery is not essential to accomplishing difficult tasks. And then two other concepts I want to talk about in this segment. First is just this idea that each moment is an opportunity. We tend to, I think the negative of this plays out in a lot of different ways. Often when I work with clients, they say something that I know I've said to myself a million times. This week, this year, this month, this term, this semester is going to be different. Right? I'm sitting there on a Sunday night fretting about everything that I have to do and haven't done and should have done. And I think, okay, I'm going to pull myself together. This is the week. Everything is going to be different, right? I kind of set myself up. It's like, the way that people talk about exercise sometimes. You start off in a new exercise regime and you push yourself too hard, right? You don't edit, you don't pull back a little, and you burn out, right? You fall apart because you get injured, or it's unsustainable. And so is that idea that tonight I'm going to make the decision to completely transform my life starting at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, right? Everything's going to be different. Totally unrealistic, setting ourselves up for failure. It happens that way when people try to change their eating habits, right? Never going to eat those things again. Suddenly, 3 days, 5 days later, you're running for the bag of chips and the candy bars or whatever it is that's probably not great in your diet, because you've put yourself in such an extreme position. So for me, the opposite of that is this idea that each moment is an opportunity, so that I only am thinking about this one moment at a time. So no moment is irrelevant. So my capacity and opportunity to practice mindfulness is not something I'm going to do for the rest of my life. It's what I'm going to do right now. And an hour from now, I'm going to try to do it again. And I hope that tomorrow I try to do it again. But really all I know, all I'm guaranteed, all that's certain is this moment when I'm trying to do it, when I'm trying to be fully present to the moment without judgment. So, whether I'm alone or in a crowd, whether I'm at work or at home, driving or shopping, each moment is an opportunity where I can practice. And I won't always be able to do it. And I'll probably forget more than I remember, except that this is what I've noticed in this last year of talking about mindfulness so much, is that I practice it a lot more because I'm thinking about it a lot more. And over time, I start to notice that I am changing inside. And as I change inside, and as I notice that I am more calm, as I notice that I am more focused, as I notice that I am more responsive than reactive, to the world around me, I feel inspired to try more, to be more aware of each moment. So when I am thinking about it this way, I might want to think about, you might want to think about some what I think of as key questions in this quest to acknowledge that each moment is an opportunity to practice mindfulness. I don't have to make a promise that I'm going to do it for the rest of my life. I only have to try to bring my attention and awareness to the present moment, in the present moment. So when I start to move away from that, I can ask myself some questions like, what is true right now, right? When I'm anxious and overwhelmed and struggling, if I can bring myself around to say, what is true right now? Am I safe right now? Am I thinking about what might happen? Is that where my mind is going? And is that where this anxiety and anger and frustration I'm feeling in my mind and body coming from? Because I'm thinking about what might happen. Or am I brooding about what did happen? Is that the connection I want to notice? Am I revising what I should have said? Am I rehearsing what I should say? Am I reviewing an interaction, right? And whose voice am I hearing? Right? When I'm in that kind of spin, I think of it as a whirlpool or a quicksand, right? Choose your metaphor of being stuck, but spinning in your stuckness. Whose voice am I hearing, right? Is it my authentic self? Probably not. Or is it that tired, needy child who just wants, a hug and a chocolate bar and a nap? Or is it that always critical dictator? Two voices who will never be satisfied no matter what I do. Is that who I'm hearing? And when I can, and then finally, and I think the most important question can be, what story am I telling myself in this moment? So when I'm in that anxious space, when I'm wanting to react rather than calmly and thoughtfully respond, when I feel all the tension and anxiety in my body, when my mind is spinning in some kind of stuck way, I can ask myself any one of those questions to try to bring myself back to the present moment and to notice what's happening in my mind and body, and to be able to really critically engage what's happening so that I'm not in the future or the past, but I'm in the present moment. Otherwise, I don't know what that story is that I'm telling myself. That's probably familiar, right? Not helpful, but familiar. I don't recognize that it's that critical voice or the child's voice. But when I can take that pause, I can ask those questions. I can see, or any one of those questions, I can get a better sense of the truth of what's happening in this moment. And that can be very helpful to me. And then the last comment I want to make about these kind of things that I would hope you would take with you for this segment is the idea that motivation matters. And this is one that I've been reading a lot more about lately from people like Jack Kornfield, one of my favorite writers in this area, because I don't know. It wasn't something I'd ever thought a whole lot about. I know that all of this, in a way, of course, sort of points to motivation. Like, what is my mind doing? How do I feel in my body? From what position am I acting in the world? But I didn't necessarily think of it that much in terms of motivation. And he writes great things about this because he's always asking himself about action. Is it kind? Is it truthful? And I think that this is a place where we really struggle in our culture because so much happens in the world that is infuriating, that is depressing, that is maddening. People say I don't think people say things that are any different from what they've ever said, but we just see a lot more of what people say about the world. And it's pretty ugly sometimes. And so that can really encourage us to be reactive in response. And so to ask ourselves, what is the motivation for my action? can I act from a place of kindness? Knowing that in the long run, acting from kindness is going to give us much better results than acting from anger or fear or greed, right? I want to put a little bit of a caveat on anger, because I think anger is an important emotion and not something to be dismissed or pushed away, but definitely something to be learned from. And, I can feel anger towards someone whose behavior I find abhorrent, but that doesn't mean I have to react in kind. I can still act towards that person with kindness. And that seems hard to do and maybe Pollyanna-ish, et cetera, et cetera. But I think Cornfield has really convinced me that it's worth thinking about. And it also comes back around to that idea of what we fill our minds with, right? If all I'm filling my mind with are those kind of raging conversations, sometimes on something like Twitter or Facebook, then I'm really reinforcing my own tendency towards being reactive and to reacting towards unkindness with unkindness. And there's actually somebody I was reading on Twitter just recently that I would really recommend. There's a publication called The Root, and Michael Harriot is one of the writers for The Root, and I happen to follow him on Twitter. And he speaks incredibly eloquently and learnedly about race relations in this country, about the experience of Black Americans. And one of the things that makes him really compelling, I think, as a writer, is that he doesn't name call. He's no Pollyanna. He also doesn't varnish the truth with something to make everybody feel better. He is incredibly incisive about going to the root, right, to the heart of a matter, to saying what is absolutely true, factual. He always brings those kind of receipts, the facts to any argument that he makes. But I actually think what is harsh about what he's saying is that it is the truth, and it often flies directly in the face of people who say incredibly unkind things based on race. But it's also the case that he doesn't do it in a way that, to me anyway, there's no meanness in it. Kindness might not be the right word, but a truthfulness that is not intended to hurt others or to damage others. And it's just something I admire very much. And I think it's a great example of bringing truth without unkindness, without meanness, to really important public issues, ones where people often really lose their heads. So I just recommend that to you as kind of a side note. Michael Harriot, The Root. So we're going to take our final break for today. And when we come back, we're going to talk about what I think is the key concept, the thing, in addition to breathing exercises, that I hope you will take with you during the hiatus that I'm about to take with Nothing But Now. Okay, so we'll be right back after the break. You're listening to Transformation Talk Radio and Nothing But Now. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Nothing But Now on Transformation Talk Radio. I'm Mariangela Maguire. So grateful to you for joining me today on the 1-year anniversary of my show and the last show before my hiatus. So the last thing I want to hope that you will think about in the next few weeks before I come back with this show is what I think is the most difficult concept in mindfulness and in this general area of philosophy, which is that the most difficult thing for us to do is to love ourselves and to accept that in the absence of genuine self-compassion and love, we are never as kind, as open, or as loving towards others as we would like to be. I think this is 100% true and very difficult, especially if you are actually a fairly kind, compassionate, understanding person, to believe this. So I'm going to say it again, that the most difficult thing is to love ourselves and to accept that in the absence of loving ourselves and having genuine compassion for ourselves, we are never as kind, as open, as loving towards others as we would like to be. Because if we are ultimately closing our hearts to ourselves, then we have created a barrier with others as well. We may be able to manage that barrier much of the time, but on a hard day, right, during a rough patch, when the world seems set against us, we will find that our disrespect for ourself comes flying to the surface and can obliterate everyone around us. So coming to terms with self-compassion, kindness towards ourselves is the key to transforming every relationship in our life. And it's the only thing that will, because otherwise that barrier will always be there. So I encourage you to give that a little bit of thought. And speaking of hearts and keeping our heart open, Michael Singer, another person whose work I really admire, always says, I stay open by not closing. And I've been thinking about that phrase a lot because I realized what I probably thought was that the challenge in terms of opening my heart is that typically, on a normal day, kind of my heart is closed, and that my job is to pry it open with a, sledgehammer or something, right? But I think Singer's perspective is so interesting that he seems to be saying instead that my natural state is to be open-hearted. So the question I have to ask myself is, what can I do to stay open? And that's where all of these things that I've talked about over the year about mindfulness practices, of noticing my habits of mind, of taking a pause before I react, of letting go of my stories. Those are things that I do in order to keep my heart open. I also work with those two questions that I think are key. I had questions earlier, but these are the two that I try to bring to bear throughout my day, especially when I feel any kind of shift in my energy, and my energy shifts a lot. So those two questions: how do I feel in my body, and what is my mind doing? And when I can ask myself how I feel in my body, that's when I can really notice, that my energy has shifted, that without my conscious mind being aware of it, something's off in the atmosphere. Some stories running in the back of my mind, something's troubling me. And I can then bring my attention to it and notice it and ask myself, how important is this? Is this really true? Right? What's the story I'm telling myself, etc. So once I notice what's happening in my body, it helps me really access what's happening in my mind. And these then are the ways that I encourage myself to be able to do that, is finding those quiet moments in the day when I can practice bringing my full attention and awareness to the moment without judgment. So I have encouraged you to think about that when you make the bed, when you brush your teeth, when you take a shower, a short period of time when you are alone, when you can concentrate all your attention on that activity. Notice every little last detail about it, and notice the habits of mind that you have even in those quiet moments. So where does my mind go? What does my body feel like? Can I bring my attention and awareness back to the moment? And as I gain greater facility and maybe work up into a meditation practice where I can quiet my mind, notice the patterns, but also bring myself back to that quiet moment, focusing on my breathing, etc., then I can bring more of that kind of peaceful energy into the rest of my life. When there is a hard moment, a rough patch, the world set against me, I can first notice what am I feeling? Where is my mind going? What is true? What's the story I'm telling myself? How is it that I'm getting in my own way potentially in this moment? And what I've also noticed in this last year, and I see this so much with my clients as well, is that when things are difficult, there is the tendency that the first thing we jettison is that kind of routine. The routine of mindfulness practices, of meditation, of physical activity, of good food, the very things that have been at the foundation of our being and have given us the space and the energy for being present to the moment without judgment. That is often the first thing we let go of when things are tough. And of course, ideally, it would be the last thing we would let go of. It's the thing we would hold on to through all of whatever the stress or tension or difficulty is that the world might be presenting to us. We'd be so much better off. But this is, however old you are, you probably have a lifetime of habit of doing just that, of essentially not giving yourself permission to be kind to yourself. And that's what these practices really are. They're a way of giving yourself permission to be kind to yourself and challenging that conviction that your self-worth is tied to your suffering. right? I think too much in our culture, and maybe others, that that's how we kind of perceive suffering, that it justifies my existence somehow, that my judgment of others is okay because I suffer, my shutting myself off from others, right? My tight grip on my stories, all justified because I suffer. So I am hoping that in the next weeks that you'll be thinking about these ideas as I go on hiatus. I want to, before the show closes today, thank Transformation Talk Radio and Dr. Pat and Linda and Jessica, and especially Jacob, for all they've done to help me create the podcast and for making it possible for me to take this pause. I would welcome you to contact me on email or my website, MaguireLifeCoach.com, or on Facebook. I'm going to be reading and writing and thinking about stuff, a lot of things going on in my life that would be quite a distraction to the show. I'm going to perhaps get back to my blog, which is called Nothing But Now also. So it would be easy to find if you'd like to learn more about it, or to go to my website, MaguireLifeCoach.com, if you'd like to learn more about my coaching practice. And I don't think I have this queued up, but there is a GoFundMe account that I would really love for you to look for. The name on it is Diamond Smith, Dymond Smith. And Diamond is a person I got to know several months ago who really could use your help. She has been through some things far more difficult than I've ever gone through in my life. And what she really needs most of all is some dental work that would transform her smile, and I think transform her life. She is an incredibly resilient, smart, funny, kind person, working so hard to keep her life together. And I would really appreciate it if you would reach out to this GoFundMe account to Diamond Smith, Friends of Diamond Smith, Dymond Smith, on GoFundMe, and do what you can to help her reach her goal. Some friends and I are working to help her, and it would really mean a lot to us to be able to help her make this transformation in her life. So, I hope that in the coming weeks, you will think about this quote from the Dalai Lama. Peace in the world depends on peace within. If we have that, we can approach problems in a spirit of compassion, dialogue, and respect for the rights of others. Always a better solution than resorting to a use of weapons and force. External disarmament depends on internal disarmament. And weapons of force can also be our words, our attitudes, the way we treat other people. And to disarm, that means inner disarmament and bringing peace into our own hearts first and foremost. So I hope in these weeks, as always, you will be curious about your mind and kind to yourself. I so appreciate you listening to Nothing But Now on Transformation Talk Radio. I hope to see you again in the summer. Take care. You've been listening to Nothing But Now, Mindful Living with Dr. Mariangela Maguire on Transformation Talk Radio. Join me next time as we continue to practice mindfulness and challenge ourselves to change. If you'd like to find out more about my work or contact me, please go to my website, MaguireLifeCoach.com. That's MaguireLifeCoach.com. See you next time.
The music for Nothing But Now was created by Salt Theory.